Cracking medium. This is a really interesting medium. Firstly, we lay down a coat of colour. So here we've got straw. Underneath, we leave that to dry, a background colour called straw. We leave that to dry, and then we coat the cracking medium over the top and leave that to dry. Now you should leave the cracking medium for about 3 hours till it becomes touch dry. It might feel not sticky but a little bit funny, but 3 hours should be enough in normal temperatures of around 18 to 20 degrees. You need to apply the top coat over the top of the cracking medium within 12 hours of having applied it. Sometimes it'll last a bit longer, but you'll be safe if you do that every time. The way we apply the top coat will dictate what sort of cracks that we actually achieve. When we brush straight up and down, we get a finish, especially with the top coat, that's more like corrugated iron, or has corrugations, peaks and troughs in it. What happens is the cracking medium shrinks when the top coat is put on top of it, and it takes the top coat with it. We're going to use Ritz Blue over the top of the straw. So the Ritz Blue will be taken with the cracking medium and shows the straw through as cracks. The thicker we put the top coat on, the more easily this top coat, or in this case the Ritz Blue, can hold together and not crack. So we will have fewer cracks, but they will be much bigger. Conversely, if we put the top coat on, the Ritz Blue, very thin, we will end up with a lot of very thin cracks all over the board. Following on from that, as I said before with the corrugations, if we have corrugations running straight up and down, what we'll have is peaks and troughs, and where the paint is at its thinnest in the troughs, that's where the overall cracks will be. So I'm painting this on in a medium fashion, but I'll get quite a bit thicker as I go across. Now also, you need to make sure that you work in a methodical manner across the cracked or cracking medium. As soon as the paint hits the cracking medium, it starts to crack. Even if you can't actually see it starting to crack, it is starting to take effect. So if you keep reworking the same area, you will find that the cracking medium will mix in with the top coat, and probably you'll get no cracking at all, or worse still, end up with a big lump on the end of your brush. Now you'll see this is starting to crack now, and we're getting thinner cracks here. We'll get wider or bigger cracks over here. If you crisscross or hatch, cross hatch, you'll get cracks running in the similar manner. And this is all to do, as I mentioned before, with the fact that we've got sort of corrugations running across there. If we were to stipple or use a sea sponge with the cracking medium, we'll get, rather than these elongated cracks, we'll tend to get a more rounded, random type crack. Make sure you cover the whole area. So we're going to put it on a bit thicker here, and obviously you can get a graduation of cracks, of much thicker or down to thinner cracks, just depending on how you actually apply the paint. If you're wanting to use metallics, now I said before you could only use the Matisse background or the minis, the Derivan minis. You can also use the structure or the flow, more so the flow, by mixing matte medium MM5 in equal parts with the flow and applying that however you fancy. This technique is called faux antique gilding, and basically we get a finish similar to old gilded gold that has cracked over time. Now it's a bit of a process. The first step is taking your frame moulding or whatever it is that you're going to work on and painting it with a background colour of either burgundy or china red. I'm using burgundy to paint the background. This is the colour that will show through the cracking or underneath the cracked gold. This sort of colour, or indeed a bright red, was what was used traditionally several centuries ago as the colour, or this is at least what the colour looks like underneath old gilding when we see it nowadays and when it's cracked and aged. Now that the burgundy is dry, we're going to apply the cracking medium. We put this on in a nice thick coat, basically as thick as you can apply it without it actually running when you hold it vertically. It won't really matter how we apply this coat to the cracks. The cracks we'll see in the next step are dictated by how we put the next coat on, how we apply the next coat. However, after saying that, the cracking medium needs to be thick enough to work, so it has to be nice and thick. Once the cracking medium is dry, it should have a very high sheen, like a high gloss to it, and then you'll know that you've got enough cracking medium on. The cracking medium should be dry within 3 hours of application. It may still feel a little bit strange, but it should be ready to go. So the cracking medium's been dry. Now we need to apply the top coat within about 12 hours. Normally you would only use Matisse background colours or Derivan minis over the top of cracking. However, in this case we want to use a metallic. So what we need to do is mix the metallic, we're using gold in this case, and the matte medium, equal parts, to allow the cracking medium to work. Now just what sort of cracks we get will be dictated by how we actually apply this coat. The cracking medium, as long as it's thick enough, doesn't really have any great effect. It's purely how we apply this coat. I'm going to stipple this coat on so that we get a really random, sort of rounded pattern. But if you see the section on cracking, you'll find out ways of getting different types of crack. Make sure you cover the whole area and don't go back over an area. Work in an orderly fashion across the surface, not returning back over an area, because the cracking medium will have started to work. Even if you can't see it starting to crack, it will have started to crack, and you may end up with a bit of a mess if you don't leave it. But for more details on the exact method of cracking, have a look at the cracking section. Now that the gold has dried over the cracking and we've got all these wonderful cracks, to complete the faux finish we need to antique the piece. To do that we'll use water-based patina soaked into a rag and a little bit of faux raw umber. And just let it mix on the rag, and we run this over the gold. So the antiquing has the effect of knocking the sparkle out of the gold, but we still perceive it to be a gold underneath, but it's not quite as in your face. You can leave it like this, or indeed, once it's dry, varnish it with the terps-based varnish. You must use a solvent-based varnish over the top of the cracking medium so as not to reactivate the medium.